And we can stop that screen share. Perfect. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Claire Muñoz, and I'm the Charles N. Mathewson Senior Director of Education. I am joined today by my co-host, Craig Rosen, Director of the Nevada STEM Networks and Administrator for the Desert Research Institute's Office of Education, Community Engagement, and Professional Development. It is our distinct pleasure tonight to open the 2021 NV STEAM Conference and welcome you all here. 2020 will forever mark a significant shift in the world of education. From crisis, we found opportunity and new ways of connecting, inspiring, and sharing information and resources with peers and colleagues from across the state and this year across the country. No longer limited by physical boundaries, we hope that the 2021 NV STEAM Conference will unite Nevada educators as we present an interactive virtual conference that can be applied in classrooms and across disciplines, putting the imagination to work while solving complex problems to meet real human needs. Before we get started, we'd like to take a moment to acknowledge our sponsors. The 2021 NV STEAM Conference lead sponsor is Tesla. Additional support for the conference is provided by Nevada Gold Mines. The NV STEAM Conference is co-presented by the Nevada Museum of Art and Desert Research Institute Science Alive program. The conference is supported by the Nevada Department of Education, the Nevada Governor's Office of Science, Innovation, and Technology, the Nevada STEM Advisory Council, and the NV STEAM Subcommittee. Event collaborators this year include the Discovery Children's Museum in Las Vegas, the Terry Lee Wells Nevada Discovery Museum, the Nevada State Museum, and the Smith Center for Performing Arts. We also had collaboration from NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory and the NASA Glenn Research Center. For those
Hello, everybody out there in virtual land.
Craig.
Yeah.
One more thing before we get going. For those of you who don't already know this, the Nevada Museum of Art is proud to offer free annual memberships to the museum. And these memberships are reserved for Nevada's K-12 educators who are actively teaching. Free memberships are provided by Clark and Sullivan and their associates. And you can request an educator membership by following the helpful links, which is attached to this session in the conference portal. Go ahead, Craig.
Now I can welcome you. Hello, everybody in virtual land. Craig Rosen here from the Desert Research Institute, and I am so excited to be able to co-host this with Claire Muñoz and the amazing, talented staff at the Nevada Museum of Art. You all are amazing staff people, and we love working with you. And I also want to thank my staff at DRI for being here and supporting us. You know, the Nevada STEAM Conference is Nevada's largest event dedicated to the exploration of ideas and strategies to implement science, technology, engineering, arts, and math into classroom practices. Over the past 7 years, our collaborative efforts between DRI, a scientific research institute, and the Nevada Museum of Art, a cultural institute, have truly produced the most memorable and meaningful professional development conferences for educators throughout Nevada. To date, over 1,700 educators have participated in NV STEAM events in Reno, Las Vegas, and Elko, representing the most comprehensive and dedicated movement of institutions and industry leaders supporting the integration of the arts into STEM. Today, we welcome over 550 educators from across the state and around the country as we continue to work collectively to bring interdisciplinary teaching inclusive of the arts to every student in every classroom across our great state. Those of you who have joined us in the past in person at past conferences, we thank you for helping us to define the collective understanding of what STEAM education is here in Nevada, and to establish guiding principles for best practices in STEAM education. That document, the guiding principles document that we created collectively, is going to be linked in the chat for you to review. Complementary to STEM education, STEAM is an interdisciplinary approach to teaching and learning that integrates authentic and implicit instruction in fine arts beyond the design process. STEAM effectively leverages both concrete and abstract thinking in meaningful and engaging ways. STEAM is the nexus of both creative and analytical processes designed to produce new ways of approaching problems and creating solutions in a real-world context.
This year, we will be exploring the design thinking process. The design thinking process, empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test, is an approach that can be used across all disciplines and is critical to developing 21st century skills that translate from the classroom to the workforce. This process encourages us to be fearless, to be curious about the world around us, to think big, to embrace mistakes, and to recognize ourselves as citizen artists and citizen scientists. Most importantly, the design thinking process implores us to use creative processes to develop new solutions to real-world problems. The NV STEAM conference opens this evening with a keynote presented by Dr. Danah Henriksen and Dr. Punya Mishra, who will encourage educators to think about arts integration by applying STEAM and design thinking concepts in the classroom. Friday evening, we invite you to a virtual walkthrough of the backdrop exhibition currently on view at the museum. The exhibition, We Belong Here, is drawn from the museum's permanent collection with several key loans from contemporary artists. We Belong Here highlights the various ways that artists and scientists tackle difficult concepts to make the inaccessible accessible and the invisible visible. Multimedia artist and composer Paul D. Miller, aka DJ Spooky's work is included in the exhibition. Paul will join us on Friday to share his original compositions and engage in a discussion around his work, which seeks to immerse audiences in a blend of genres and global culture while drawing attention to environmental and social issues. Saturday morning, grab your coffee and join us at 9 a.m. as NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory gives us a look into the world of artists and designers from JPL's The Studio and their valuable contribution and collaboration with the science and engineers at NASA as they work together to envision the future. Following JPL's keynote, you'll move into your selected workshop sessions.
So workshops, we've got plenty of them that are really exciting. And they include Bay Area artist Cal Speletich, who uses classroom accessible lasers and mirrors to inspire curiosity about the universe. NASA educator Susan Kohler encourages experimentation in a rover prototyping workshop. And Desert Research Institute's Dr. Tiffany Pereira, who will look at the art of science and how fossils can be used to build narratives and uncover new discoveries. We also welcome Academy Award-winning Foley artists John Roish and Ellie Matlin to demonstrate the science behind the sound we hear in film and television. Additional workshops will be facilitated by the Discovery Children's Museum and the Terry Lee Wells Discovery Museum's education directors, Laura Christian and Megan Scheidel, and the Smith Center for Performing Arts, who will be presenting Clark County Poet Laureate Vogue Robinson. After all our workshops, we will reconvene on Saturday at noon as we synthesize our conference with closing reflections and an opportunity to look towards the future.
For our educators, if you indicated during the registration process that you're a Nevada educator seeking continuing education hours, please know that we're tracking your participation across the conference. Your total hours will be based on the sessions you attend live. Continuing education certificates will be issued by DRI and will be emailed to you about 4 weeks following the conference closing. For the duration of today's conference, we'd like to remind you to log in to each session you've selected. Sessions will be recorded and available about 2 weeks after the conference through the nvsteam.org website. We are also adding resources to each of the presentations that will include web links and PowerPoint presentations, so continue to revisit the content. We're going to begin the opening keynote momentarily, and before we begin, we ask that you please check that your mic is muted. We are recording, so you may choose to leave your video on or off. And at various times during the presentation, we may ask you to engage via the chat. We're also using Slido to manage questions. Please follow the Slido link from the chat and use that to pose questions, which we can help bring to the conversation at the end of the presentation, where we will open the room for dialogue. With that, I think we're ready to go ahead and get started. And I'm so pleased to welcome all of you to the 2021 NV STEAM Conference. We're going to go ahead and kick off the conference with our opening keynote, Creating STEAM by Design, Beyond STEM and Arts Integration. And I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Danah Henriksen and Dr. Punya Mishra. Dr. Danah Henriksen is an associate professor of educational leadership and innovation at the Mary Lou Fulton College at Arizona State University. Her research examines the intersection of creativity, technology, and design in education. Dr. Punya Mishra is an associate dean of scholarship and innovation and professor also at the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College at ASU. He has an affiliate appointment at the Herberger Institute of Design and the Arts, and he's internationally recognized for his work in technology, integration in teaching, the role of creativity in learning, and the application of design-based approaches to educational innovation. In addition to being an award-winning professor, Dr. Mishra is also a visual artist and a poet. And with that, we'll turn it over to you, Danah and Punya.
All right, wonderful. Hello, everyone, and welcome. And thank you for that lovely introduction, Claire. We're thrilled and excited to be here with you today to talk more about the connections between design thinking and STEAM for teaching. This is a topic that's near and dear to both Punya's heart and to mine. We're both researchers who study creativity and are heavily involved in design work and design methods in education. So we're really looking forward to this conversation. I won't spend a lot of time on the introductions in terms of who we are because Claire did that, I think, better than I could. And we'll go right into kind of the presentation, and I'll give you a quick overview of the next, we have about 45 to 50 minutes here, wherein we're going to start out, or Punya's going to start us off talking about the foundations of design as a field and give you some more background on design and how as a field it has informed the idea of design thinking, kind of a foundation for the whole talk. And this will lead us into some discussion of what design thinking specifically is. Which I'll cover both as an overview of design thinking broadly, but also a specific model of design thinking that we'll focus on that Claire touched on just a little while ago. Punya will discuss how design thinking and STEAM pair up well for education and how they kind of relate to each other and can inform your teaching. And as we get a little later in the presentation, I'm going to discuss a couple of case examples of design thinking and STEAM from teaching, and those will give you a sense of kind of how some of these ideas can come together for teachers and learners. And finally, Punya will share a recap of all of it. And at the end, as Claire mentioned, we'll have some time for question and answer, which we're really looking forward to. So as you're thinking of anything related to these topics that you might be interested in, if you have questions, you can feel free to put them in the chat or use Slido or bring them to us towards the end as well. And we'll definitely look forward to that opportunity to engage and interact a little bit more. So I'm going to turn it over to Punya here, and he'll start us off.
Thank you, Danah, for starting. And thank you, Claire and Craig. I'm really excited to be here. So that's the passing of the torch from the design. And it's really important, we think, to understand that we live in a designed world. Teapots to dresses to advertisements to corn. I mean, you might think that corn is a natural thing, but if you really go back and look, you know, a few hundred years ago when corn was first discovered by the Europeans when they came to the Americas, it was a very different kind of corn. We have, through a process of artificial selection, designed corn to be a certain way. So almost everything that we see in the world around us is designed, and that is really important to understand. And the other thing that is important is to understand that most of this design is sort of invisible to us because it has become a part and parcel of the world that we live in. This is one of my favorite podcasts. If you're interested in design and the designed world, it's called 99PI or 99% Invisible. It's a lovely podcast to listen to. So when we think about design, I think one of the things that the design brings together the arts and the sciences, and this is something that Claire spoke about and Craig spoke about. So when we think about the sciences, what do the sciences study? The sciences study physical phenomena. It's things in the world out there. The arts focus on the human experience. And design is the study of the artificial, of the human created work. And how we study it varies as well. In science, we focus on analytic controlled experimentation, classification, analysis, mathematical modeling. In the arts, we focus on the interpretation of things, on rhetoric, on analogy, criticism, and evaluation, aesthetic evaluation. And in design, it is the act of doing, it is modeling, it's finding patterns, seeking and creating patterns, and this act of synthesis. And each of these has different kinds of value systems that it brings to play. And I think it's really important to understand those as well. In science, we focus on objectivity, rationality, neutrality, skepticism, a focus on quote unquote truth to get at the nature of the universe. In the arts, it is much more subjective. It is a focus is on creativity. There is a sense of this imagination, and there is this concern for justice. And when you look at design, design is very practical. So one of the things that as educators, we have to recognize that we are all designers of the particular content and specific situations. So it's not surprising when you think about the designed world that we live in, that Herb's called the and so the question then is how do we define design? And this is a quote from David Perkins, who has written a lot about this, where he says, design is structure adapted to a purpose. And so if you look at all of these examples that we have on screen here, everything from a street to a stop sign to information graphics, to computers, to buildings, these that have been put together in specific ways for particular purposes. We just got a puppy a little while back, and I know this, that puppy could never have survived in the wild. So clearly that puppy has been designed over the past thousands of years by humans to be the way it is, right? So question then comes up, who is designing when we are looking at this act of design? And this is Herb Simon, who I mentioned before, and he said that everyone who designs courses of actions aimed at changing existing situations into preferred ones. I want to unpack this quote a little bit. So the first is, why do we design? We design because we want to go from a situation that we have now to something that is preferred, that is better. And if you think about yourself as educators, that's exactly what you're trying to do every moment. And that's what graphic designers do. That's what architects do. That's what a whole range of professions do, which is try to go from a certain kind into something better. The second thing to emphasize here, how is this done? Is that we devise courses of actions. We strategize, we plan, we build, we construct ideas of how we can go from this existing to preferred situation. And finally, most importantly, who is doing the designing? It is this process. So I have this picture of, which I don't have here, of a kid spitting out his food. And I said, this kid is also a designer because he's going from a preferred situation, from a situation to a preferred one, which is he doesn't want to eat broccoli, right? Now, when we think this way about design, there is an important quote, one of my favorite quotes. This is from Steve Jobs. And what he says is that everything around you is made up, and that life can be so much more powerful if we recognize this fact that everything around us has been made up by someone no smarter than you. And he says that once you learn that, you will never be the same again. Now coming to education, we have to recognize the fact that every aspect of education is made up. From lunchrooms to 50-minute periods, to the idea that you walk from one room to the other and you switch from learning maths to doing PE, up to the idea of certificates and degrees and universities and conference calls for Zoom conference meeting. All of this stuff is made up. All of education is designed. And I think once we recognize that fact, it actually empowers us, gives us agency as educators to be designers. And we've always known that. I think all of us recognize the fact that teachers and educators design curricula, but most importantly, what we design as educators, what each of you does, is design powerful learning experiences. Now, John Dewey famously said that yes, education happens through experience, but it doesn't necessarily mean that every experience is genuinely educated. And what Dewey talked about is that there are these impulses that we have, that children have, that adults have, which are inquiry to understand out what we create with our artistic aesthetic values and meaning. And if you think about design, it is all four of these primary impulses coming together in a powerful, integrated manner, that it brings the interdisciplinary, the creative, the human-centered problem solving to the forefront. And with that, we shall pass the baton back to Danah. This was my little spiel about design and the fact that education is designed, for her to talk a little bit more about what is design thinking. So with that, Danah, the flame goes back to you.
Thank you, Punya. And just as a little heads up, been having some problems with connection with hearing you, as far as I think your video keeps breaking up and audio. So that may not be fixable. We all know how that goes, but I thought I'd give you a heads up. So we missed a few little pieces. But I'm gonna.
I was speaking so passionately.
Oh, that's okay. I think we caught. Well, we caught, I think the key pieces, and that did a nice job, I think, of laying out the foundations of design as a field and design work overall. And we'll talk more about how the very nature of design really makes it a great fit for STEAM, with its blend of the arts and the sciences, where we can bring these intuitive and imaginative and analytical and logical kinds of thinking together for creativity. But first, I think it might help for us to just kind of revisit this idea of what do we really mean by design thinking. We talked a little bit about design as a field, as the field of sort of the artificial world around us that's been designed and created by humans as an area of problem solving and human creation. But what does it mean when we say design thinking, and what is design thinking? So if you can go to the next slide, Punya. So for one definition, we can start out with the world's authority on all and everything, which is Wikipedia. I'm joking a little bit for a nice general way of thinking about it, but this definition actually does align with what most design experts will tell you they mean by design thinking, which is to say that it's the processes, it's the thinking processes, the strategic processes, and the practical working processes that designers use to develop design concepts. And when we say design concepts, we just broadly mean ideas, artifacts, problem solutions that are created or developed by people towards some purpose. So then we can also move along and look at a definition from the Interaction Design Foundation, which is one of the biggest design schools in the world that covers all areas of design, from interior design to urban planning and other areas of design. And their definition, I think, points to several key components: understanding a user, challenging assumptions, and redefining problems, all which kind of come around to seeing design thinking as a kind of strategy to approach, to solve, or to resolve problems and challenges. And that creative piece has to be there too, where we're trying to identify solutions that we might not otherwise think of. So then, we can also look here and see it as a kind of creative problem-solving process. And because creativity spans all subject matters, you find it in the arts, you find it in science and math, in music, in language, in really any area of human knowledge, you can find creativity. So design thinking as a creative problem-solving process is a process that we can put to work across all subject matters, which makes it really nice for something like STEAM, where we're sitting at the intersection of subject matters. It can be used in teaching content, but also in designing content. So design thinking has become so popular in business, in industry, and for our purposes in education because of this widespread utility. Now, I want to say that there's many models out there to help you think and work like a designer, and you really don't even need a model per se to do these kinds of things, to do the search to understand problems, to try to come up with solutions and try them out. But I think what we would argue, and a lot of people who work with design thinking and in those spaces would argue, is that there can be a lot of value in working with a model, especially if you're new to design thinking or working with people who might be new to it themselves, like students. So having a model, it just kind of gives you a flexible structure and some tools to follow when you get stuck through some of that creative problem solving process. So there are many design models out there. And having that model is useful. But that leaves you with the question of which to choose. And the Interaction Design Foundation looked across many different variants of design thinking models that are out there today. And they found that most of them have between 3 to 7 phases, but most are really similar. So at some level, these models are all variations on very similar themes. So you're not necessarily going to go wrong in picking a particular model, because all of those variants of design thinking should embody kind of some of the same principles, which were first described by Herbert Simon, who is the design scholar that Punya mentioned, kind of considered the father of design, who started it as a field of logic and of inquiry back in the 1960s. But if you start investigating those different models out there, you're going to notice that most searches will keep taking you back to the Stanford Design Schools or the Stanford D Schools model. So here we have kind of a look at what that actual model is that they use, or one representation of it. And the Stanford D Schools approach is probably one of the most popular, because they're, as a school, really at the forefront of applying and teaching design thinking. It's also nice because it's a very manageable model to get your head around and to use with students in their project work as well. And one thing that's useful here, I think, is from a teacher perspective, I know how important it is to have some resources and materials out there that you can look for and help you think about to connect with the work that you're doing with students. And the Stanford D School makes a lot of resources and tools freely available on their website. And there's also just kind of a lot of info on this model out there in the air that you can usually find and access. So based on this model, the 5 phases of design thinking according to the D School are: first, to empathize with your users or your students or your stakeholders, whoever you're trying to design something for; to define your problem and to define it thinking about the needs of your users, your stakeholders, your students, and what are their needs from their perspective, what are their problems and challenges from their perspective, and bring your insights to that. Then to ideate, which is essentially a kind of brainstorming process where you would be trying to challenge your assumptions and come up with as wide a range of possible ideas for solutions that you can think of. In the ideating phase, you're just trying to go wide and think of as many ideas as possible. Then in prototyping, you'll kind of narrow that back down a little bit and choose an idea that seems most relevant to the situation and your students or your users, and then create a kind of model that you can then in the final phase test it out. And it's a solution that you can kind of test it, see how it works and how it's going. So I'm going to go through each of these in a little bit more detail. I'm getting a little bit of an echo. Is anybody else getting that? Maybe not. Okay, there might have been somebody.
I was getting a little echo there.
Okay, I think we got it. It sounds good now.
Okay.
Yeah, cool, thanks. So the first mode of the Stanford model is to empathize. And that's because empathy is really the very first foundation of human-centered design, and it is the most essential starting piece for any kind of design work. Now, in this mode, designers are going to try to observe and observe their users, observe their behaviors, interact with them, possibly interview them, really try to immerse yourself in understanding the experience and the perspective of the user, the stakeholder, however you want to define that role of the person who you'll be designing something for. A designer might ask questions. They might be listening to the stories and the experiences of their users, observe their interactions, really try to explore their world and understand their feelings and where they're coming from, because that will give you a really good insight into understanding the context and the problem. So some other design models sometimes start the process with problem identification and come to empathy later, or just weave that through the model. One nice thing about the Stanford model is that it requires designers to start right off the bat with trying to empathize with the people that are experiencing the problem, or the people that you're trying to design something for, the people that you're trying to problem solve for. So the next phase in the second mode is the define mode. This is where designers use the information that they gathered from empathizing to try to really hone in and focus on the problem. It's really critical here to try to go beyond a kind of simple, obvious definition and come up with a more detailed overview of the problem. This phase is also really critical because if you think about it, How you define the problem will define the different types of solutions that you might be able to come up with. And those problem solutions will depend heavily on how the problem has been defined or framed right up front. So if you define a problem as being about one thing versus another thing, that will drive the possible solution set in different directions. So the goal here is to try to articulate a kind of problem statement based on what you've understood or learned previously about the problem, and then kind of focus and reframe and use that information moving into the next mode, which is ideate. And this ideate mode is where we are going to try to explore a wide amount and a wide variety of solutions and ideas and just brainstorm. The goal here is to just, again, go beyond the obvious and generate as many as possible of far-ranging ideas, different solutions, and approaches that, that can connect with the problem. And they often say here too, the phrase go wide. And that means keeping the problem in mind, but also allowing flights of fancy and imagination and just try to get all the possible ideas out there. People will sometimes do this through like a brainstorming session, either with colleagues or people who might know something about the task that you're working on or what you're trying to define, or with your users. But another way people sometimes do this is by keeping like an incubation journal with them. And that's just keeping, you know, a journal or some paper or on your phone, a place where you can jot down ideas as they come to you throughout the day. One thing people will find a lot of times with creativity is that we lose a lot of the ideas or little sparks that might come to us throughout the day as we get distracted and busy with other things. And just keeping kind of a track of and a record of the different things will surprise you at the end of the day or at the end of a design process, all that you've kind of accumulated along the way. So after ideating, we will move to the fourth mode, which is prototyping. So after designers have generated a nice wide range of ideas, it's time to put those ideas into action in this fourth mode of prototyping. And that's where we're going to try to choose an idea, whichever one you've kind of settled on through your prior work seems maybe the most relevant, most connected to the problem, and prototype or create some kind of a model or a solution to the problem, something that can be tested or tried out and see how it works. So we say oftentimes that prototyping is the act of making ideas concrete. So you're taking the ideas and trying to make something out of them that you can try out. It's not an attempt to arrive at a final solution because the design thinking process is very iterative. It's just an opportunity to jump in and try to kind of put pen to paper or sketch something or create something that will be a little bit more of a real representation that you can try out and see what you can learn from that. So it might be a physical object, it might be a storyboard, it might be an activity, it might be a really rough draft of a lesson plan or a drawing or a sketch, but it'll give you something that will allow you to move on to that fifth mode, which is testing. And testing is really kind of what it says that it is. That's where designers are going to try that prototype out and test it with actual users or stakeholders or representative user stakeholders. So in this case, you've got some kind of a prototype, so it's an opportunity to put it into action, and then you can interview users, observe them interacting with the prototype. In that case, if you've prototyped a lesson, you might do a little trial run of it and see how it goes with your class. Take some notes, observe, use any other process to gather feedback for refinement of solutions. And testing can show that a designer might need to refine the prototype. They might need to go back and redefine the problem if they learn something in that process that says, oh, I think I need to rethink this, or maybe re-examine the original point of view or some of the things learned in the empathize mode. So I think the key here is to keep in mind that this model can look very linear. You know, it's kind of along this nice horizontal path, and we talk about them in linear terms as 5 modes or phases, but it's meant to be sort of free-flowing and iterative so that when you get to that test mode, that's not necessarily the end of the road. That's a place to learn something and to refine and change ideas, just as you do, you know, every semester, every year of your teaching career. It's kind of an iterative process of creative development and refinement. So that gives you a nice sense of the process, and I'm going to pass it back to Punya to talk about why design thinking and STEAM.
Thank you, Dana. There have been some issues. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, I can hear you. I hope, see if everybody else can.
Okay. I'm just going to keep my video off. I'm sorry. I am I'm getting some internet issues. So why design thinking and STEAM? And if I go back to this slide about Dewey's 4 primary impulses for learning, where he talked about inquiry, construction, communication, and expression, you see that design thinking brings all of those pieces together, and it captures something essential, which is that design thinking is STEAM. It requires you to bring the analytic and the creative together. It requires you to take the meaning with each other, the artifact with others, and so on. And it has the artistic expressive element, the analytic and creative process that engages the prototype and redesign. And what's really that
Punya, just one moment. I'm having a hard time hearing you. Danah, I know you're familiar with the presentation and you're also, I think, hearing the same audio. So if there's a moment where you might be able to re-emphasize, because your audio is coming through quite clearly for us.
Sure.
I
Actually,
apologize. Danah, can you go ahead?
Yeah, why don't I was just going to suggest, why don't, if you don't mind, I'll just pick that up. So let me see where we're at. Okay.
Maybe, and I think we missed most of that last slide. So for everybody, if we could just go back one slide and then maybe repeat, that would be really helpful.
Okay, so right here on the design thinking and STEAM.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, so I think at this point it's sort of a useful transition to think about what does STEAM have to do with design thinking? And you might have already kind of noticed some of the areas of possible overlap where we've talked about design is this blend of disciplines and this place where knowledge sits at an intersection of disciplines, which is really what STEAM is at some level. STEAM, although it sometimes is seen as kind of the arts integration in STEM discipline, which it is also about, I think, thinking broadly about disciplinary connections and not just putting the arts into STEM, but also looking for the places where disciplines connect. And the arts, in fact, can be more than just the visual arts. It's not just the arts or music. It can be language arts, figurative ways of thinking. There's a lot there. So we're really trying to think about how disciplines intersect in very real world, problem-based ways. And so design thinking is a real world creative problem solving approach that's highly interdisciplinary and seems along those ways to be just a nice connection point for STEAM. So going to that next slide, I think we can, let me make sure we're on the right slide. Yep. I think we can take a look at what design thinking is all about, not just in the definition, but also in the goals of it and see how it relates to STEAM. So for example, you can see the elements of different disciplines embedded in this idea of being both an analytic and a creative process. And the fact that I think, as we noted here, design goes beyond those disciplinary boundaries. By its very nature, it sits at the crossroads of multiple disciplines. And designers have to draw on ideas from STEM disciplines like the natural science or mathematics, as well as the arts or aesthetic considerations. So as this analytic and creative problem-solving process, it can be done in any subject matter or field and is a nice place for real world complex problem solving. And it can typically involves kind of a combination of thinking, learning, or ideas from multiple disciplines. So that's where we see on the next slide that we talk about design melding STEAM together because it offers a framework for rethinking STEAM curriculum, not only for the work that the students do, or maybe a framework to help your students through a complex real world sort of STEAM project, but also a framework for you as a teacher to think about as you're considering curriculum redesign along more, or not even curriculum redesign, but thinking about creating an assignment, a lesson, or something that has a more STEAM focused way of thinking. So this can serve as a nice framework for that. It can also be valuable scaffolding to building STEAM projects. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in some examples later. But going to the next slide, I want to kind of come back to that idea of going beyond simple connections and surface level combinations of subjects. And that's where you see where a design challenge and a STEAM paradigm can be really useful. And if you come back to the idea of what a design challenge is, it's a kind of complex problem solving. It can be a way to use STEAM more powerfully so that STEAM doesn't just become that place where we're trying to figure out how we're going to fit the arts into STEM. Because it has those naturally connecting disciplines, it gives us that frame that can be useful and lets us go beyond some of those surface level connections to look for some authentic design challenges that kids can work on a little bit more authentically around disciplinary knowledge in the real world. So then we can also come back to, on the next slide, that idea of creative, interdisciplinary, human-centered problem solving as one of the sort of quick definitions that we gave of the field of design before. And creative, interdisciplinary problem solving. Now, doesn't that sound like STEAM? We're getting creative, human-centered, and using that analytical problem solving in an interdisciplinary way. And then on the next slide there's just a little diagram that's a kind of visual way to think about that concept. So that for any math people out there, I want to say this is not intended to be an actual graph or bell curve representation. I could see where even looking at that might stress some mathematicians out, like, no, this can't, this doesn't work from a mathematical perspective. But it's really just a way to consider that design thinking sits in a space that blends analysis and intuition. The arts and music and STEM disciplines, it's that sweet spot where STEAM sits as well. So then we have to think about, what does that mean for educators and learners to be designers? So first we can think about educators as designers. And you can go on, yep. So this is a place where I think as educators, we can, like I said, engage with some authentic interdisciplinary real world projects. Because of the complex nature of design challenges, it's a way to sort of build resiliency and that problem solving activity or ability, cultivate that open-minded and creative approach, because we have to be flexible and go wide with ideas and also choose prototypes and test them, and develop a deeper understanding of yourself and others that has something through that idea of empathy, which is so critical to design thinking, but also becomes really valuable across the disciplines in a STEAM-based way, in a very inquiry-based way. And again, talking about empathy in design is not so much empathy in the sense of just having a feeling for others, because we think of empathy oftentimes as a kind of a feeling thing, which it can be, but empathy in this sense, when we talk about it in design, is a very cognitive skill. It's being able to understand and conceptualize the perspective of someone else, being able to step out of the blinders that we all have for our own world and understand something from another person's perspective, so that we can be more creative in problem solving. So then as we go to the next slide for learners as designers, and on to what that means. Well, lo and behold, you find the same things, the same types of things that design thinking can offer to teachers, it can offer to learners. Again, this opportunity to engage with more authentic projects, to be more creative, to cultivate this more open-minded and creative approach, to build that sense of empathy and contribute to a culture of creative problem solving. And this word designerly thinking also comes up a lot. That idea of developing a designerly identity and a sense of agency in the world is really important. So that we oftentimes, in a lot of my research, and I know in some of Punya's as well, we advocate for the idea of teachers seeing themselves as designers, because we are all, going back to that idea of the world being 99% designed. In some sense, we're all designers. We're all trying to design or improve existing situations and take them to something better. So with that, we come to the idea of teachers are designers of learning experiences. And I know there's the passing the baton slide, but I'm just going to keep rolling with this. Yep, thank you, Punya. So with that, I'm going to give a couple of kind of general case examples to provide a little bit more of a snapshot, because we've been talking to you here about what design thinking is and what it means and all of the great connections that are there for STEAM. And we've given you kind of a model that you can explore. There's so much stuff out there, and we'll also give our contact information at the end. So if you're looking for resources or publications, you can feel free to get in touch. But I thought it would be helpful to have a couple of kind of real world examples and cases of what this might look like. So the first one is an example of students using design thinking, and then we'll go on to one of a teacher using design thinking for her curriculum. So this first one is an example of disciplinary integrations that were done in a kind of project-based activity that I think fits very nicely into both STEAM and design thinking, where the teacher designed an activity that allowed the kids to become designers of shoes while also learning about multiple subject matters. So this activity is called the Fancy Feet activity, and it was one of several similar kinds of activities that were featured and studied in an issue of the Journal of STEM Education, and was developed with some ideas from the Teach Engineering website. So this is a 4th grade problem activity, and it integrated, I think 3 or 4 different STEM disciplines, materials, natural and man-made, statistics, mathematics, measurements, a lot of different different areas and threads of STEM, but also brought this together with arts and aesthetics in this kind of a focus on design. So they had several classes of 9-year-olds in the study project, and they explored the role of designers and engineers in shoe manufacturing. And the kids got to experiment with materials and then design and construct their own pair of shoes. So moving on to the next slide. Perfect, thank you. So the students started off by posing their own statistical questions, trying to investigate things about their own shoes, about their own feet, and also their friends. So these were kind of questions about shoe types, shoe fabrics, materials, shoe sizes, measurements, foot lengths. So they collected all kinds of this data in a sort of empathy type of research where they're trying to understand themselves and also their friends and other people as shoe consumers and shoe users. And different ideas from mathematics were woven in here too, ideas like variation, the idea of what's typical, of mode, of prediction, of uncertainty. These are all things that they explored. So again, it sounds like a little bit of sort of early mathematical research, but it's a kind of empathy research to understand themselves and their peers as users, and also gather information that will take them to the next phase where they have to do all this before defining the problem. So we'll move on to the next slide, where you can see how some of the phases of design incorporated in some of the steps and activities that they did after having initially gathered all this information. And you can also see from there how they were able to start to define a problem or a challenge. So then from there, after defining the problem or the challenge with all of this early information gathering, they were able to get into small groups and go into ideation mode, where the kids started to brainstorm, to generate ideas about their shoe design, about some possibilities, about how they wanted to conceive of it artistically, what the shoe should look like, and what needed to happen functionally as well. So then in order to build a prototype or an initial shoe model, they had to learn about and select the right kinds of materials. So after they'd built a model, they were then able to put it to a test and think about how it could be improved in a very iterative way. And so the next slide talks about, how they go through some of these modes and phases of design. And it makes a point that I think is important to say in a STEAM project like this, where that the kids are going through these modes or these phases, stages, whatever you want to call them, of design as a scaffold for their learning. They're not just going through them to make an end product, although that does happen as well. They might, depending on what the problem or the task is that they're given, they might well create an end product, whether that's an artifact, whether it's an actual physical product, a solution to a problem. But the important point, I think, is that learning this way is also very much about learning during the process. So for example, prior to designing and constructing those shoes, they had to answer a series of prepared questions from the teacher. And these questions provided a kind of scaffolding. And it was important that these questions were open-ended, because open-ended questions enable students to generate their own ideas. If we start to give kind of closed-ended questions, we've limited the design process, and we've limited those possibilities for ideation. So one thing that can be really helpful in structuring a design task like this, in addition to kind of working out different things that they can do in each of those modes, is to think about where they can be prompted with those open-ended questions to generate thinking, to kind of scaffold the process. And so in that way, the work of the teachers with this kind of scaffolding involves structuring that problem-solving task and problematizing the disciplinary content. Where do we find areas that they can ask questions and problematize it and really get in and investigate? So the next slide shows a sketch from one of the students that I thought would be nice just to kind of take a look at, because it also shows how there are other designerly ways of thinking that get implemented along the way in a STEAM-based design project and that bring design habits of mind into play. So this project involved several STEM disciplines, like I mentioned, natural and man-made materials, statistics, math, measurement, but also the arts in a designerly way, because the kids really had to think about not just the functionality of their shoes, but also the look and feel. Can you imagine if shoe designers out in the world thought about no aesthetics at all, only the functionality? We'd have, we wouldn't have most shoe sections in department stores. We'd have one type of functional shoe for everybody. So that artistic, stylistic piece of it was important too. And you can see where the kids mentioned in this one, the blue ribbon for beauty, which was really cute. So by building out this project with the design processes, the kids are learning through planning, sketching, through testing those proposed shoe structures. the chosen material compositions and the extra aesthetic features. And also, I think it's useful to note that planning and sketching processes are considered maybe one of the more critical media of design work. As you're going through these modes of thinking, it helps to visualize ideas. So they're critical to design work, and yet they're often given limited attention and space in younger grades, especially in set curriculum in younger grades. So that idea of planning and sketching is fundamental to what designers do. And for the kids who are working with these processes, it calls on a whole other way of visual thinking that's really critical for creativity and creative development, but not always practiced as much in K-12 curriculum. So the next slide also has just one more sketch. And in this example, you'll see they're thinking both about functionality, how to make it stronger, but also how to make it pretty. And I think it's good to note that both of these sketches we showed are second designs, and they also did third and fourth, which shows how design thinking practices can help kids move away from feeling like they do an assignment and then they're done, they get a grade and they move on. Instead, it's much more of a real world way of doing projects where you come up with something and then you have to keep thinking about it. You have to keep iterating. You have to keep learning and trying it out and refining. There's no one and done in design. And if you think about the way most of us work, we're constantly refining. If a writer turned in, the first draft of a book and then it was over and done, it would be a very different book than what we oftentimes see in a published, finalized production process. And that goes, I think, for most of our work. So students in this project also had to test their own work by asking people to rate their shoes along several criteria. And then the kids rated their own designs based on what they found and had a kind of a nice critical lens on what worked, what didn't work, what did they find. So it was a nice way of blending science-minded thinking with aesthetics and style. And moving on, I'm gonna just really quickly emphasize how this whole project focuses on a framework of getting kids to move toward what researchers call informed design, or activities and projects where they're learning by designing. So this requires more of an approach where you're focused on bigger picture projects, problem-based learning, project-based learning, where the kids get a chance to dive in and spend time engaging with designerly ways of thinking and doing, while also getting to interact with the content and knowledge along the way. So I'm going to move to my next example, which is another design snapshot. Thank you. So this is an example from a teacher that I worked with in a class that I created and taught about design thinking. Design thinking is a means to helping teachers in developing curriculum or thinking about creative curricular goals. And in this example, the project or the type of lesson that the teacher was trying to move towards in her teaching was a more STEAM-oriented kind of project. So the next slide will show how this teacher, Catherine, was teaching and wanting to teach an elementary Spanish lesson, but make it something much bigger and richer than just the sort of teaching the kids the Spanish words. So she joined my design thinking class feeling like her teaching was kind of, in some areas, feeling a little uninspired, a little bit more subject matter bounded. Her problem of practice in this class focused on designing an in-depth STEAM project for students. And again, that subject matter she was working with was Spanish language. So the project example that she came up with was about the issue of water crisis, because this is a major, again, real world, big picture, interdisciplinary community concern in some Spanish speaking countries. So we'll move along and show how this kind of, I think, shows how Catherine's goal was a natural fit for STEAM and for design, where we again see that sweet spot of creative problem solving in that space between kind of analysis and intuition, and that's where design thinking lies, and it fits nicely with STEAM. So she wanted her students to use more creativity and problem solving skills in a lesson about the Spanish vocabulary, but also something more interdisciplinary. So we go to the next slide and see how Catherine used the design process herself in this case as a teacher to build out her lesson. And she used some of the work that we did in the class to kind of go through these 5 phases of empathy, definition, ideation, prototyping, and testing to develop a project. Her students themselves didn't necessarily go through all 5 design phases in the STEAM lesson that she created, but several aspects of design thinking are there. Some of the things that she did to come up with this for empathy, she did interviews with her kids and to understand what was motivating them and what interested them. And she learned that they felt like they didn't necessarily relate to all of the workbook or textbook activities that they were getting. So she was able then to define the problem in a way that helped her see giving the kids something that connected them to the world as important and letting them get involved in ways. She had a brainstorm session with several other teachers and also kept an incubation journal, which is, again, just kind of a handwritten journal with her at all times where she could jot down any ideas that came to her. For prototyping then, it was time to sit down, look at her ideas and build out a little part of that in a lesson prototype, and then testing it, of course, just the opportunity to try it out. Once you got a draft, whether that's for a lesson, a project, a unit, you can try it out, see how it works. I think she took some notes and observed for what she might change the next time. So in the next slide, we see just a little bit more about this project, which I think shows how her processes moved from her initial goal, which was just about coming up with a better and more creative Spanish lesson, into a more fully realized language and culture project with some STEM in there as well about clean water issues in Spanish-speaking countries. So her students analyzed the importance of clean and safe water usage, and using the design process, she identified some interdisciplinary STEAM connections. The kids conducted their own research on the science and social dimensions of water usage. They considered complex problems that occur across Spanish language countries, learned the science of the water cycle. They created and designed posters and diagrams to teach others about their work. So we can go to the next slide and just real quick, that'll show where she made a simple Google site to lay out her main task, which is to have students use their design skills to research and teach others in the school lessons about the water crisis and to design a solution to the country's water solution or water problem. And she implemented a lot of sort of content along the way that I won't dig too far into. But one of the things that she also did was kind of find some other natural STEAM connections. So the kids presented their work to peers and taught it in a different class. And they did student-created slideshows, posters, brochures, and I have a couple of examples of those posters on the next one, which shows how they designed some visuals that communicated the water cycle in Spanish words. So again, kind of that basic science and Spanish vocabulary, but also a little bit of creativity to design their works. She also came up with several other more kind of ongoing and interdisciplinary aspects or mini assignments that folded into this project, probably more than I think I have time to describe here, but just real quick on the next one. One more thing that I thought was pretty cool connecting to the idea of empathy was that she introduced her students to a hands-on game where she provided them with clean and dirty water tokens, where the dirty water tokens significantly exceeded the clean water tokens to help the kids understand the situation that people might be in other countries around the world. This way, when the kids exhausted their clean water tokens, they had to make use of the dirty water tokens. And side note, like she didn't actually make anyone drink dirty water. That part of it was just the game, but more importantly, she noticed how her students' experience of doing this shaped their understanding of water usage in their home, and also resulted in a kind of increased sense of empathy among her students, showing them, how they could share their clean water tokens to sustain each other longer. So this kind of was just a way to connect them to a lot of different issues and rethink her curriculum. And this next quote, I think, was something that she shared with me in the class that I felt was really powerful, because she talked about how design thinking came along and helped her at a really great moment in her career where she needed and wanted to feel like a designer. Teachers oftentimes get squeezed by so many demands, and the opportunity to be creative and to recognize the inherent creativity in design that teaching involves, I think, was really powerful. And she talked about how this played out for her students in terms of more creativity, more collaboration, more student ownership and responsibility of learning. So she said, without it, I would have struggled creating this project, but as a designer, it was, so exciting to see the development. So I'm going to try to wind down real quick and go through these last few slides, Punya, really quickly. So I wanted to kind of, as a coda to that story, mention that this example came from a class that I taught a few years ago at my former university, which I set up around design thinking for teachers, helping teachers use design thinking to get new and creative ideas to rethink their curriculum or their STEAM goals or other goals. So while the course was, about teachers using design thinking, they ended up using it a lot more with their students. The big project of the class was teachers kind of working on some big picture project or problem in their classroom. But along the way, we did a lot of other little fun activities. Won't go into those in depth, but I did want to say, moving to the next slide on the major themes. I did some research on this class because it seemed like that, not anything that I did, but the design thinking process was so powerful for teachers that I did a qualitative study of it. And the teachers in their own words shared some of the things that they came away with. Some of the major themes that were powerful for them in being more creative and rethinking things that they wanted to redesign or redevelop or be more creative about in their teaching. The ideas that kept coming forward were the idea of becoming open to uncertainty, valuing empathy, and seeing teaching as an act of design. So I have a few quick quotes, one for each one of these, where, like, for becoming open to uncertainty, we see a teacher talking about how, we think we know what the answer is, or maybe just what the issue is that we're dealing with, but it's important to go through that uncertainty and struggle to define the problem. And that's key to design processes. And that idea of being okay with uncertainty, which exists everywhere in the world, is helpful for teachers, and empowering for teachers, but also for students when they get that opportunity. The idea of valuing empathy was just, I have to tell you, one of the most powerful parts of the class. And teachers, I think, are naturally empathetic, but a lot of them discussed how they were actually stunned by the landmark shift when they really purposefully and intentionally applied empathy. They discussed, how they thought they understood what empathy was and that they understood their students, but until they actually investigated it, even with just, a few simple little interviews or conversations with their students, there was a lot that they learned, and that really helped them and empowered them. And finally, I think this is critical, that this is really this paradigm shift in working with design thinking, where we understand ourselves as teachers as being designers, and having this toolkit or this process becomes incredibly powerful in framing the work of teaching. Connecting to something that Punya said earlier, teaching is design. You're already designers, and your students can be too. This process just gives a frame and some tools to support that. So with that, I was gonna pass the baton back to Punya, but we have just a few very fast recap slides that I will kind of go through so that we leave some time for question and answer. So on the first one, just noting that every aspect of education is designed, and that's something that Punya touched on before, that you don't have to look very far, whether it's in the actual physical design of school spaces and classrooms, to the design work that we do as teachers in trying to create and come up with powerful learning experiences for our students. It's all an act of design. And through that, I think the idea that teachers are designers becomes really, really powerful. And we also covered briefly the Stanford design model. So again, that idea of empathizing, defining, ideate, prototype, and test. I know I didn't get into a lot of the details or tools here. A lot of those are available online, and happy to chat in the Q&A and point you to some spaces for that. But I also want to just emphasize that this is meant to be a very iterative, flexible process, so that as you're approaching it for yourselves or your students, it doesn't just have to be like, okay, we must empathize, and then after we define, ideate, prototype, test, we're done. It's very iterative. It can be helpful maybe to go through it once or twice in the modes as they're shown, but you can kind of play around with this a little bit and think about, I just finished ideating, but I think I need to go back and empathize a little bit more. So it's meant to be a flexible and empowering process. And again, coming back to that idea from Herbert Simon, that everyone who devises courses of action aimed at changing existing situations into preferred one is a designer. So, doctors, lawyers, professionals of any kind, and I think especially teachers, we're all looking at an existing situation and trying to move that to a preferred one. So in some sense, it's all of an act of design. I know, Punya, you also touched on Dewey's 4 impulses for learning, the idea that learning always comes around to these 4 pieces of 4 areas of human impulses. The idea of inquiry, that we have this instinctive urge to find things out or to inquire, to construct, to make things, to create things, to build things. It's very satisfying to create things, and it is for students. The idea of communication, to be able to talk, to listen, to interact with others, and to express that artistic touch, the idea of being able to bring something forward that you're thinking about or feeling for yourself. And all of these kind of come together in creative ways in a design sort of paradigm. Finally, I already talked quite a bit about the idea that design thinking is STEAM, and that they do pair together really well. I guess I say it is STEAM. They each occupy their own spaces in the world, but they come together and blend together really well, so that if you're interested in STEAM and coming up with STEAM projects, design thinking can be a really nice framework for helping to structure that and helping your students dig into those interdisciplinary creative connections. So again, just finally kind of going back to that idea of the definition of design as something creative, interdisciplinary, human-centered, and problem-solving, fits so nicely with the idea of STEAM, that we're trying to create something, that we have the arts and music and the more kind of human-centered areas in the STEM disciplines and powerful knowledge there, and they come together in very interdisciplinary, creative ways to solve problems for real human needs and for real-world types of tasks and activities. With that, I will end that on a thank you. And Punya, I'm sorry about the audio issues, but you are so much a part of this presentation that hopefully we can both be part of the Q&A. Thank you all so much for being here. It's been really exciting to talk to you about that. I'm sorry I took a little bit longer.
Thank you, Punya. Why don't you come back and try to join us for the Q&A? And I'm sorry that we missed out on you for quite a bit of the presentation.
No, just listening to Danah, I think she did a fabulous job, better than I could have. So I actually feel I was good as a driver of the slides. So thank you, Danah, for stepping up. Really
that was a vital role. So thank you. And you are we created this presentation together. So, but we all know, I saw some comments from the teachers in there saying, oh, this was happening all day as I was trying to teach. Audio issues. So
well, and we have learned that educators are extremely nimble, especially over the last 12 months, and resilient, and work as good collaborators and have to lean on each other. So I thought that was just a wonderful presentation. And I just wanted to reemphasize those major themes that you brought up. So becoming open to uncertainty, valuing empathy, and seeing teaching as design. And I think that final piece, seeing teaching as design, is what we hope to translate to our educators today. And we hope that they take that home with them and start to think differently about the approaches that they take in the classroom. We had a lot of really good questions coming through in the chat. The link to that Slido Q&A is in the chat. I'm going to drop it again in here. You can pose questions there. You can also promote other people's questions that you think are interesting. We have a few that have risen to the top, and Craig is moderating that. So Craig, do you want to open up with the first question here?
Absolutely, Claire. Thank you. And thank you, Danah and Punya. We have some great questions for you. Cecilia is asking, when teaching the design process, what strategies do you have to maintain the creative process? So many students go straight to Google and lack originality.
Let me see can you hear me? Danah,
yes.
Give me a thumbs down if you can't hear me, right? And you can take it from there.
We got you.
So as long as I can do it, we'll do it, right? So I think, I go to Google all the time. And I don't see that as a hindrance to creativity. The issue is what questions are we asking the students to research, and B, what kinds of queries are they putting to Google? And I think that one of the important things, that this is part of the program that Danah spoke about where she taught that class, is that one of the tenets of the program was never ask questions to which you know the answer as a teacher, as an educator. Because then what happens, you become a part of the journey that the students are going through. And then this issue of plagiarism and all of these things go away, because it really is about synthesis. It is about interrogating the world, whether it is Google, these are all resources that we have as educators. I always feel that Google is the greatest technology innovation we have seen in our lifetime. And I don't have stock in Google, so it could be any search engine, right? But the point is that what that allows you, for the first time in the entire history of human cultural evolution, anybody with an internet access, except me, who doesn't clearly have internet access right now, or any shape or form, has access to more information than ever was possible in the entire history of the human race. Now, there's a lot of false information, there's fake information, there is blah, blah, blah. I agree. But isn't that our job as educators to guide and process that, to help our students learn how to do that? So I don't see Google as a problem. I think if anything, we are limited. I know I am limited by the kinds of questions I'm putting to my students, or the kinds of questions that I'm asked, like generating from them. Genuine questions will lead to provocative, thoughtful ways of doing. And I think design is that process of pushing that boundary, always trying something new, testing something out. That's the important process.
Yeah, I love the fearlessness that design thinking allows. You know, it is the process of testing, prototyping, building empathy, and then repeating that process and dipping in at different points. But the fearlessness that is allowed in this kind of pilot process or prototyping process is something that I hope we can all lean into. Craig, I know we have another question here from Caitlin Langan. Caitlin, if you did want to unmute, you are welcome to. Craig will go ahead and read your question, and if you wanted to join in, you're welcome to.
Yeah, so Caitlin asks, how do we cultivate that open-minded and creative approach with students while keeping our lessons culturally relevant in the limited time per subject?
You know, I think that's a great question. As far as culturally relevant, I think thinking about the things culturally relevant and the open-minded and creative piece, I think, go really nicely together, because it's considering what is most relevant to the lives of your students, what you would connect with. So the example of the teacher who came up with the activity on water crisis, even though students don't have the same experience as people in other Spanish-speaking countries that might be experiencing that issue, she was able to think of some ways, relatively quick, easy ones, their clean and dirty water game, that allowed them to connect the ideas back to their own lives. And that generated multiple possibilities. So I think the idea of kind of keeping it creative and open-minded goes to the notion of the open-ended questions that Punya mentioned, how you're structuring the task. If the students actually have to make something or create something, that's something that they'll naturally have to kind of stay open and creative. And I think it gets easier along the way with practice. The first time students are engaged in one of these projects, you might find very nervous, I'm not sure about that. But as you kind of go forward and do more, I think of these design thinking types of processes, students really open up and start to get more comfortable and really enjoy the flexibility and the creativity. I love the idea of keeping it culturally relevant. And I think that that's going to be different for every teacher. But that's maybe where that idea of the empathy phase of it can kind of come in, where you think about, and I know people sometimes wonder, teachers are pressed and squeezed for time. How am I going to do all these interviews? It doesn't have to be like an elaborate research phase, but just a quick session where you talk to your students and ask them questions. It sounds so obvious, but I had several teachers say, oh my God, they just stunned me and blew me away. I didn't realize what they were thinking was not what I thought they were thinking. And they came up with some really great ideas and told me more what they were interested in and what they liked and didn't like. And so that can be a really helpful place. The time constraints is always a challenge, how to do that within the constrained span of time. It can start just in ways that seem like what would be manageable? What would be sort of a piece that could fit in for the time that I have? What can I do with this piece of time? And then you can kind of expand and carry it out over multiple course sessions. Punya, do you have any thoughts on that piece, the time constraint piece of it?
Time constraint is always a challenge. I mean, that is educators, but design is always constrained. I mean, that is what, when in the beginning, when I spoke about this idea that design is in the particular, that's why a solution that might work in your classroom may not work in some other classroom. And so I think that whatever the wiggle room that you have, that's what you work within. But I want to come back to this cultural responsive thing and something that Danah said and just build on that. I think the biggest component of empathy or our cultural relevance is empathy, being able to walk in somebody else's shoes. And it is this important component of design, why that sort of becomes the first element of it, is part of the challenge of cultural responsive pedagogy or approaches is how do we understand another perspective? And the only way we can is through empathy, is through listening. And having your students engage in that, having yourself engage in that. I remember this math teacher in Chicago Ken, this amazing, imposing person, so much personality. And he did this one focus group with the students, and he was blown away by what they told him. And I remember that, this was like 2 a.m. in the morning when he sent that file because he recorded that audio. And I had tears in my eyes because you could see this person change in his way he was thinking of his students just because he sat down and he listened to them. And it took a while. It's not easy because students have these barriers. However, I think if we have, and culturally responsive pedagogy is critically important, but it cannot happen without dialogue, without empathy, without this ability to listen.
Yeah, and I think there's some, empathy is something that you can kind of practice on a regular basis, not just with students or with teaching, but also like if I would always have my students who are teachers do some activities, and I would try to do them myself too, where like if you go into a store and you deal with someone who seems a little bit cranky, try to put yourself in their shoes and sort of experience or consider some possibilities for what they might be experiencing. So empathy becomes a sort of a habit of mind or a practiced reflexive skill that can be useful. And there's I can also share some links to some publications that we've done around design thinking, where we have these little like lab activities that help get people kind of breaking through their barriers, like a little empathy lab where we ask people to tell a short story from their life and then retell it from the perspective of someone else involved in that. So some of these different little practices that you can incorporate in your teaching can be helpful for getting students, because I know it can be students who have been through many years of sort of standardized testing and all of the things that gets put upon teachers and students. It can be challenging to step into this sort of more open-ended space, but some of these little classroom activities that can kind of start flexing those barriers a little bit can be useful, or just quick things that you can do to kind of flip the script on however we might be thinking, or get students to flip the script on however they might be thinking.
Well, and I think there's two approaches too. One is in how you teach and one is in what you teach, and using the design thinking process as you're thinking about how you build your curriculum in your classroom, but also your own personal approach to how you might teach that. Before we go on to the next question, I just wanted to address a couple things. We will be making this PowerPoint available. It will be attached to the session. So the recording of the session will come later, but the PowerPoint, we're going to hopefully upload that for you tonight. So you have these tools accessible, and you can access that by going to the session. You'll go past the bios, and at the bottom, it has helpful links and attachments. And we'll be uploading those through the course of the conference over the next 4 days. The other thing I wanted to mention is that we will include the Stanford model, and that will be one of the links that we'll attach that has been discussed a lot tonight. Craig, do you want to bring us another question?
I'm going to keep on going. Yeah, we have
Great.
Lots of questions from our audience here. The next one comes from an anonymous person, but living in the times we're living in, how can these STEAM projects be presented that you presented be adapted for hybrid or distance learning?
Can I go with that?
What was that?
Can I go with that?
Oh, yeah, yes. Sorry. I thought this was, yeah.
So in fact, I would argue that projects like this are not necessarily more amenable, but are amenable to this medium better than other, the standard practices that we typically have. I mean, one of the biggest challenges that happened, or like many schools or school districts tried to do, is try to replicate regular schooling, seat time in this time of Zoom. But instead, if we think of the child or the learner as a resource that they have within their home and so on, and think about giving them these projects where they can go and create, and then the teacher, and they can check back in with the teacher, work collaboratively with other students. So there is actually, in some ways, it opens it up in some powerful ways by what we call sort of humanizing the curriculum. I mean, coming back to this previous question of culturally responsive pedagogy, one of the things that, if you think about it, what we have done with school is we have built this building. And we have said, when you are there, you are learning, and when you are out of it, whatever. And that is such a terrible sort of disjuncture we have created in our society. And I think this possibly is an opportunity, despite all the challenges, of blurring those boundaries that we have made between what learning is, what school is, what home is, and community is. And so I hope that some of you have been trying some of these things and that we can continue this even once we get back, whenever that may be, that we can blur these distinctions and possibly think of this project-based learning, think of design-based approaches as being powerful ways of inspiring and connecting students to these powerful ideas of content that we need them to understand and cover.
But Craig,
Great. I'm going to go on so we can get through as many of these questions as we can. Steve Gaskill asks, do you think we should rethink standardized testing as well? Teaching to the test often crowds out time for design. The big question.
Yes. Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. That's probably something that's on every teacher's mind when they start, hearing about more creative, project-based, open-ended things. Yeah, I mean, I do think that if I had the power to kind of magically change how we do assessment, I think that's something that could be rethought. We always say assessment in itself isn't a bad thing. It's how you're assessing, and some of the standardized assessments maybe don't necessarily align with some of the things that we would like students to be doing. But so yes, to that. I still think that design projects and some of the most creative teachers that I've talked to, I did a project interviewing National Teacher of the Year award winners a few years back, talked about the fact that oftentimes breaking away to the degree that they could from some of the standardized content and doing some of these more creative projects, but trying to fold in the types of information or knowledge that kids would need for the test, ended up resulting in better test scores at the end of it. They were still doing the sort of design-based, open-ended, creative project learning, but kids were more excited and more engaged with learning, and that ultimately resulted in kind of better test results at the end of the day. But I get that it can be scary and unnerving, given that the tests are oftentimes not necessarily well aligned with the kinds of creative approaches that we would like to see happening in schools. So I feel your pain.
So one of the things that I always say is that teaching to the test is not the problem.
What's the test?
It's the test that's the problem,
Yeah.
right? And if there is some weird silver lining to this whole pandemic, is like lots of universities have said they won't take ACTs and SATs anymore. All right, now the admissions officers actually have to dig deep and try to understand and get where that student is coming from, what they have achieved in order to give admission. And so I think we need to be, and this is some work that Danah and I and Carmen Richardson, who's a former doctorate in a program, have done around how do we evaluate creative projects? Because that's a challenge too, because part of the idea of the standardized test is that you can have this one output, then you can now levelly compare everybody against. But if you're giving them projects which lead to very diverse outcomes, we need, as educators, ways of evaluating and giving feedback to students. And I think some of the work that we have done in that space might be of interest as well. And so you can reach out to us and we can send you some links and so on.
Well, and that assessment process is losing out on the empathy building and the cultural responsiveness. It doesn't take any of that into account, which is what makes these students so wonderfully unique. Rosita had a great comment that she, from this session, was reading The Pedagogy of Oppressed by Paulo Freire and was unsure of how to start implementing his ideas, but now she's got a good roadmap here. So that's a nice comment that just came from the chat. And I think we're starting to see some good takeaways from our session tonight. Craig, do we have another question we want to hit before we conclude tonight?
Oh gosh, yeah, but I'm going to get on my soapbox for a second and jump in on this because, the word school to me, right? I looked up the word school, the definition, and it's an institution for learning. Well, I would love to change the language and change it to centers for innovation. Wouldn't it be awesome if we could send our kids to centers for innovation? And instead of a classroom, which is just four walls where learning happens, we send them to laboratories where actually all this can take place and experimentation and innovation can happen. So I would love to even, blow up, forget testing, but blow up the whole system, educational system. And change the language that way.
Well, we know people in the governor's office. So Craig, I think we got a head start on that there.
Yeah, I think some of them are on this call right now.
I think so.
We're happy to add our voices to that.
I'll jump off.
Like it.
I'll jump off my soapbox and go back to the questions. One of the teachers is asking, open-ended questions are very hard for me to come up with. How do you do this with lessons?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And the simple answer to that is ask the students, what are you curious about? What are you curious about? And it takes a while to inculcate that, to be able to be genuinely curious, not curious in the way of, oh, I'm curious about why the quadratic equation is so and so. No, genuine curiosity is about rainbows. It is about why certain rocks have patterns, why this song appeals to me, how can I become a musician? How can I, get humans to terraform Mars? Those are the kinds of questions that spark our curiosity. And there are no right or wrong answers to that. And so getting students to ask these questions, to see the world with new eyes, that's what knowledge, that's what learning is about. And one of the things I say is that, if you are a science teacher, you have to see science everywhere. If you're a music teacher, every note, every sound in the world has to have some aesthetic meaning for you. Good, bad, that's not the point. And it's only then that you can model for students what it means to be a science teacher, a maths teacher, an educator, right? And I think that open-ended questions are all around us. I mean, I did this one video once where just walked out in the street in Chicago, took a video of one of those orange cones, 15-second video. And the question was, what's the volume of that cone? Now think about what that does. The equation is the least important thing. They can Google it. But the real inferences that they have to make is, how do I figure out the height of that cone from the person who walked by it? What's the diameter? What's this? Now you are doing real back of the envelope mathematics. So I think open-ended questions are all around us. It's just that we have to break out of the shackles that we have. And we have a lot of those as educators.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about the idea, thinking about the idea of the things that you wonder about, or that your students might wonder about. So we did this project, and you did more with it, Punya, in Chicago, which was called the I Wonder Project, where you start with the idea, I wonder. So starting with the things that, what do I wonder about? How could I think about this subject matter, this topic, and phrase it as something that's a question of curiosity, and asking your students, I think, to that idea, what they wonder about, what they might be interested in, and seeing how you can kind of broaden that framing in a question.
I've also been thinking a lot about, I've been thinking about the word resonate. So thinking about students and asking them what resonates with you, because it's not always things that are positive. There might be things that are negative or interesting or baffling, but things that stick with them. So asking them, instead of like, what is your favorite or what did you like, what resonated with you and why, and trying to encourage a conversation based on a different kind of dialogue. Well, we are getting right to the end of our program tonight. Craig, I don't know if we have any big pressing questions, but we do have some conclusions that we want to come to before we finish tonight's session. Craig, how are things looking, or are we ready to?
I think we're looking good. I mean, there's definitely some unanswered questions that we can maybe address offline, or maybe we'll come out throughout the rest of the course of the conference.
Great. Danah and Punya, do you have any closing marks for this evening session? And before I invite you to that, I do want to say that Punya and Danah are joining us again on Saturday and hosting a workshop. It's a boot camp of sorts, introducing you to the design thinking process. I know that the 10 o'clock session is sold out, and I think there is still room in 11 o'clock. So if anybody wanted to change their session, I think you can still make that happen on the back end. All of our sessions are going to be recorded. So even if you can't participate in one of their workshops, you can come back and visit that later. The recordings will be posted in about 2 weeks. And again, we will add all of the resources and links to this session on the nvsteam.org website. With that, Punya and Danah, do you have any closing remarks for our session today?
I just want to start out by saying thank you so much for all for being here and for being, I know how much time teachers are spending on Zoom. So for you all to show up, and it's just, I think it is evidence of your commitment, your curiosity, your passion for the profession and for your students and for these sort of creative STEAM-based ideas. So it's really encouraging and heartening. And I appreciate you giving us some of your time tonight. It's like I said at the very beginning, these ideas are near and dear to my heart as someone who studies creativity and sees it as the thing that moves the world along, and our students as the people who are going to do that, and you as people who are doing that by moving them along. So I hope some of this has been helpful. We did include our emails at the end of the presentation, and I mean that if you're looking for resources, I've written a lot around this topic, and Punya has too, and we both try to make most things that we write publicly available in case anybody wants them, so you don't have to go digging behind institutional paywalls. So you're welcome to reach out if there's anything else that you need. And yeah, thank you for your time is one of the most valuable things you have. So thank you for sharing it with us here tonight.
Thank you. And Punya, did you have any closing remarks?
Yes, I just want to second everything that Danah said. The greatest people on the planet that I have the pleasure of working with are teachers, and part of the challenge of my job at ASU, this is before when I was at Michigan State, I worked with teachers all the time. I get less chance to do that. So thank you so much for giving us this time. If there's one thing I want you guys to take away, forget everything else. Remember one thing, which is everything that we do in education is made up. We people made that stuff up. And yes, all of us work within constraints and boxes, but there always is wiggle room to change, to do what is right for our learners. And I wish all of you all the best in this attempt to do what is right by the learners who are in our care. They are our future. We have a selfish investment in them because they're the ones taking care of us, because we are not leaving behind a very good planet for them. And it is really in the hands of each one of you, each one of us as educators, to design a better world. And if anything else, it is that none of these things are sacrosanct. We can change these things, even though it's in small ways. And I wish you guys all the best. And thank you again so much for taking time to be with us today.
Thank you again to everybody. Thank you, Danah. Thank you, Punya, for joining us tonight. Craig, thank you for being my co-host. We look forward, yes, we look forward to seeing everybody back here on Friday night at 4 o'clock. We have a little bit more social program. We'll have some wonderful music and visuals. We'll take you through the exhibition here at the museum. The museum is open, and for our educator members, you get in for free with your educator membership, or if you want a new membership, we can help you with that. Please come and visit us if you can this weekend. And if not, we'll see you in the exhibition walkthrough Friday at 4. And then
it's at 5 on.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's at 5.
It is at 5. It is at 5 on Friday. Thank you, Craig.
Have a drink in hand, everybody. Make sure you drink and toast. It's a happy hour.
Bring a drink. Yes. And then we will see all of you Saturday morning at 9 when NASA's JPL's the studio joins us and we break into our workshops. Danah and Punya, we will look forward to seeing you back on Saturday. I know we have a lot of people joining your sessions, and I think this has been a really incredible conversation and very inspiring for all of us who work with students. And I thank you all for joining us tonight. Have a wonderful evening.
Can I add a real quick thank you also to the Nevada STEAM Conference, to all of you, to the Nevada Museum of Art, and all your sponsors for making this opportunity, for inviting us, and also for making this opportunity possible to talk about creativity and STEAM and design thinking and all the things we care about in education. So
yes, thank you. And thank you, DRI, too, for being here with us.
Yes, thank you.
Wonderful. Great. Thanks so much. Have a great night. And we're going to conclude our session.
Bye, everybody.
See you Friday.
Thanks.